Hi, Andrew. Welcome to LTADchat.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. So just for everybody, the purpose of LTADchat is for us to share conversations about developing and implementing best practices in youth and adolescent physical activity, fitness, and long-term athletic development. This is the shorts version of LTADchat, where we use a picture's worth 1,000 words format. This allows our guests to show concepts using a few visuals or slides. And today, happy to have Andrew Pichardo with us. He's going to share insights into one of his papers from his PhD work at AUT University in New Zealand. Now, during this time, Andrew amplified his existing skills as a practitioner by diving into various long-term athletic development models. One of them being the youth physical development model of Lloyd and Oliver, who actually served as mentors, as you can see on the paper, along with Dr. Craig Harrison. Now, in this paper shown on this slide here, Andrew's going to discuss how and why he combined or integrated several existing LTAD models. So, Andrew, let's start with figure number 1. And can you take us through your thinking and the process about how you created this figure, and maybe start with just giving us an orientation to the figure as well?
Yep. Cool. So the orientation, kind of how I set it up, or how it's set up here, is at the top you have the DMSP, which is a developmental model of sports participation, which was made in '99 by Jean Cote, and it was more around just different phases of youth participation in sport. It was essentially a series of interviews with high-level um, athletes from different sports, and they kind of then went back and quantified and tried to figure out some patterns with the existing amount of support they received and how many hours they spent in different sports and when they started specializing, things like that. So it's based on a series of interviews, and they kind of created these stages based on what they were finding common between these different families and athletes. In the middle, you have the LTAD model from Baldwin and Hamilton, which is one that kind of popularized the LTAD movement back in the early 2000s. And so these are the green boxes there. It has the different stages and some of the different skills that they broke the model down into, and when you would be able to best acquire those skills or hone them in. Um, and I don't have the key here, but basically the solid boxes are ones that they thought was based on chronological age, and the dash boxes were ones that they thought were more determined based on maturation status. So if you're looking at this, you can see that strength, according to this model, you wouldn't focus on strength until way later in development. So that was just one thing that kind of caught my eye. And then the YPD model at the bottom from Lloyd and Oliver. This is the more recent model, so it kind of had the luxury of using things in the past to come up with what they've done. But as you can see here, rather than having skills where you can, only train them during a given time period, it's more of a spectrum of when it's best to emphasize them, but you can train things throughout childhood and development. And things like strength and power can always be emphasized because they're always trainable, as opposed to waiting until you hit a certain, maturation status. So when I was originally writing this paper or doing this kind of groundwork for everything, I wasn't in my original plans to create this figure or to compare them like this, but I started to look into all this stuff early in the proposal part of my PhD, and getting all the models down together, because I wanted to see where weightlifting fit into the models, because that was my end goal, was okay, how can weightlifting benefit youth? So I kind of took steps backwards to come to this and see this is kind of where a lot of the big picture, the eagle's eye view of how things fit in, and some of the other models that you'll see here in a second were based around these three models. So these seem kind of like the models or the frameworks that laid the foundation for some of the more specific training modes or fitness qualities. So then I looked more into it, and then for me, it helped me to line them up with each other so you can kind of see, because they all have an age range. But if you're reading, you're essentially having to read three different papers and collate everything in your head, or make your own little spreadsheet about when things are actually happening. So this was a way to get that information, put it all together, see where things line up with each other across the models.
Yeah, Andrew, you mentioned, your forte, so to speak, is weightlifting and spending a lot of time and focus on strength and power development. And if we go to figure 2 of the paper, you provide a progression of resistance training, weightlifting movements, and plyometrics. So, again, just take us through the thinking and the progressions that are shown here in this figure.
Yep. So this is kind of where I was trying to go with, with that first model. The first model is very big picture. It doesn't give you really, exactly how to train them. It kind of tells you what to train and when to train and what kind of things you should be focusing on. But if you're a coach, which I'm also a coach, not just a researcher, so I want to know, okay, what does that actually mean? If I go to design a session, what kind of things do I need to be including? If our focus is strength or fundamental movement skills. So that kind of led me down, this line and collating these papers together. But essentially, the common theme here is starting with low structure, um, fundamental movement skills early on, and over time, you're increasing the loading, the intensity, and the training structure as you mature over time. So that was a theme that was consistent across these models and the next models here, but these models were interesting to me because the weightlifting and the plyometric model, they use stages from the LTAD model. So the fundamentals, learning to train, training to train, training to compete, training to win. And for me, I like those stages, not necessarily in the LTAD model's context, but just the terminology. And it's a good way, it's a good verbiage to align these stages to. So the fact that they used them and kind of set and put more structure in them, that really caught my eye. And that's one reason I wanted to include them. And also, these are kind of the three main resistance training components you would think of if you're trying to create a curriculum or some kind of resistance training plan for a school or a team. You're thinking about your traditional resistance training, your squat, bench, deadlift, rows, pull-ups, things like that. Plyometrics, your explosiveness, and then weightlifting. Those are kind of the three different most common or biggest buckets of resistance training that you could kind of include. So seeing these and kind of same thing as before, trying to put them together, align them with each other to have a better visual instead of trying to read three different things and keep them in your head and straight and collate them. This is a good visual to see how training can progress over time and how they were previously aligned to these training stages.
Yeah, a follow-up question on this figure right here. A lot of times these models, as you know, get criticized because they look to be too prescriptive, as in when you are 6 to 9 years of age or you're in the fundamental stage 1, you are doing exactly those activities. Or when you move forward to 14 to 18 years of age, you're in stage 4, right? Or stage 3, you're doing those exact movements. Number one, do you want to speak to the blending of these activities across the stages, but also the impact that training age has on where one may start?
Yep. Yeah. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is training age or there's resistance training skill competency. So kind of what the top model, the Gronischer model, what resistance training did was they kind of had, they have a spectrum here of as resistance training competency increases, this is how you can progress the movement. So I think the skill and coaching the athlete in front of you instead of to this model is always going to come first. So if a kid can't squat, it doesn't matter if they're 18, you're not going to go into high eccentric loading, back squat kind of thing. So I think keeping that in perspective and knowing, I guess, as an average maturing athlete or someone that is developing properly according to their age and whatnot, this is kind of just a suggested progression you could use. But then you'll notice here with like the resistance training competency and some of the exercises it has there, things like balance training and core strength training are something that's emphasized throughout. So there are certain things that should always be part of an athlete's training, and then you can progress them, maybe the intensity or complexity of the exercise, but certain things like like stage 1 for plyometrics, let's say, minimal eccentric loading, unstructured play. So it's not like you're not doing any eccentric loading. You're just providing the eccentric loading in a way that might be in the form of a game or some hopping activity as opposed to doing a depth drop from a box, something like that. So I think that was one thing I meant to touch on, but didn't. But definitely having an understanding of your athletes and where they're at, and having a framework in your head for how you can actually implement these things is definitely key, as opposed to just looking at this and trying to plug and play this straight into your program. You have to kind of take it in context with every aspect of your program, the kids you have, how much supervision you have, the type of equipment you have. All those things are really going to determine, what these training things look like in the real world.
Yeah, one more question on this slide. And again, let's speak to coaches and individuals who they may not be as familiar with pediatric exercise physiology. And if we get a youngster into this program and they follow along as shown in this progression, speak to us a little bit about the training-induced adaptations and why specific exercises are programmed when they are. And again, in an ideal world with this progression, based on the neural adaptation versus, more of the, hormonal, muscular tendon adaptations that occur later in adolescence or during adolescence.
Yeah, so I think based on those things, that's, is going to complement the type of training you do. So that's why there is a big focus on the fundamental movement skills and different movement patterns and things early on, because they're primarily getting those neural adaptations up until they hit maturity. So they're, no matter what kind of training they do, they might not gain a lot of hypertrophy. So your training shouldn't aim to make them bigger, because they essentially won't get much bigger during that period of time. So then it's more about getting their nervous system to be more efficient at patterns. Neuroplasticity is big, really even as young as a baby. So all throughout childhood, they need to be developing these patterns and pruning and becoming more efficient, because that's the adaptations they'll get. So they'll get stronger, they'll still get faster, but it'll be not through bigger muscles, but more, more efficient neural systems, essentially. And then as they start to hit maturity or puberty, and they do have the impact of testosterone and things like that, is when you could start to look at other training modalities, or at least changing the variables to elicit different changes. So if you're a senior in high school playing football and want to play at the next level, you might have to get bigger, and you might be able to actually prescribe training to elicit that goal. But if you're 11 years old or even 13 years old and you're pre-pubertal, it's essentially spinning your wheels to try to get these people to gain a whole lot of muscle during that time. Not saying you shouldn't. I mean, that's a great time to instill good eating habits. I'm not saying you shouldn't care about what they're eating, because they're not going to get huge, but just knowing, what you're trying to achieve and how and when they're going to achieve it will help you, I think, or to help the coaches a little bit determine, first of all, their expectations for the training program. So not thinking they're going to get huge and being, disappointed when kids don't get big, but also, just keeping that in perspective of what your goal of training for is. If you're training kids, it's about getting neuronal adaptations, and as you get older, you can start to worry more about hypertrophy and actually muscular adaptation.
Good, thanks for that clarification and insight. Let's move from strength training or resistance training into some of the movement qualities, speed, agility, and then also aerobic fitness or conditioning. So in figure 3, you have the strength aspect there at the top, along with power or plyometric development. And then you also include speed, agility, and aerobic conditioning. So other, physical qualities that we want to develop holistically, I guess we'll say, with athlete development. So yeah, walk us through speed, agility, and aerobic conditioning in terms of how they are layered in progressively into the model.
Yep. So I mean, it's really similar to resistance training. Early on, a lot of the main focus is gonna be around their fundamental movement skills and getting movement patterns down before you worry about the intensity or the load of training. And it's also gonna be more of a focus on doing this through unstructured free play or small-sided games or things like that you have to do to engage maybe a 9-year-old versus a 19-year-old. Um, that was kind of the common thing that I found. And then, so like specifically with agility, so if you can't get in a good position to change a direction, doesn't matter how much reactive agility training you do, you're not going to benefit that much because you can't even move your hips or whatever. You don't have the strength to get in that position. So, uh, you know, just building up overall movement skill is going to be the base for anything early on. And then as they get older, you can increase the um, structure of the training in terms of what you prescribe, normally the intensity of the training and the volume as well. So the do more training. They might have to rest. They might need greater rest times because the intensity is higher, but they're able to then do more focused training for what they're doing. So a speed workout for a 9-year-old is not going to look probably shouldn't look the same as it does for an 18-year-old that's going to go to state and track, and that's kind of his job. So your speed development early on might be doing relay races or other plyometric hopping abilities that's going to increase their speed, and you might be able to teach little technical things here and there, but it's primarily going to be about teaching them the basic patterns of sprinting and just moving and single leg support and things like that. And that pretty much follows for agility and aerobic as well. With agility, doing more reactive stuff, more reactive training later on when they do have maybe a better strength base or they do have better change of direction mechanics, then you can start to increase the intensity or the complexity through, reacting to a stimulus and things like that. And same with aerobic. With aerobic, it's essentially you can so really in this particular paper, it was looking at soccer players. So it was around using the use of small-sided games to increase aerobic ability while providing technical and potentially tactical training as well. So from a personal perspective, I think that's kind of the route to go with aerobic or conditioning work. Like if you can build it in the form of a game, anything where they have to figure out space and have ball skills and things like that, that's pretty much always going to beat sprints or gassers or any kind of running. So I know, so I guess, there's restrictions with sports and when you can and can't do sport specific things. But for me, if I'm a coach, I'm never going to want to have just a straight up conditioning session. Like I want to figure out a way to gamify it or build some kind of skill development in through that without just lining up and saying, okay, today we got 660s. And so it's not always possible, especially with COVID right now. There's equipment restrictions and spacing things, so it's hard at times. But I think that's what it comes back to is if the kids are hyped up and excited and want to be involved in training, they're going to go harder in a small-sided game than if you're just getting the same exact volume, but they're just running sprints or something like that. So I think that's something that kind of changes throughout time. Sampling years, you might be doing games with less easier, simpler games to figure out because, a 9-year-old might not be able to have the mental capacity to do more advanced games. But the older you get, then you can really start to get more skill development in or complicated games where they're having to figure out and solve problems while they're building this base. So Yeah.
Good. Andrew, thanks a lot for taking the time to share your insight into this paper and the integrated model of long-term athletic development. And we hope everybody listening enjoyed the episode. You can find all the episodes of LTADchat short versions, such as this, along with our full 1 hour panel discussions on the LTADchat YouTube channel. And don't forget about the LTADchat on Twitter. That happens first Tuesday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern. Andrew, thanks again.
Thank you, sir.